most original and creative talent in our business. Would you welcome Mr. Orson Welles?
Ladies and gentlemen, Orson Welles again, come to call for another visit.
Good evening. This is Orson Welles.
Siemens Private Blend.
Orson Welles speaking. I wasn't sure yesterday whether this broadcast would be coming to you from Havana, Cuba, or New York, New York, but the weatherman who works for the airlines decided I wasn't to get further north today than Miami, Florida, and frankly, your roving reporter doesn't mind admitting that his teeth aren't exactly on edge at the prospect of a few free hours in the sunshine. Stout Californian though he may be. Change that to read plump Californian, I'm on a diet. So here we are, and what do you know, before me as I speak of the historic beaches. Historic for me, anyway, because it was on and about these same sugar-colored sands that Haywood Broun and I used to settle the problems of the world before going to Hialeah. This in a day when the world's problems were even easier to settle by conversation than they are now. And here lived another chum of mine, earning his living as a lifeguard. Joe Cotton is the name. And here, too, my wife took me one winter when I was very ill. Yes, here before me, as I said, are the historic beaches for me, and behind me, as I haven't said, is a fairly historic week, including a night with a spiritualist medium in Mexico and a night on the Great Pyramid of Chichen Itza. We'll get to that in just a minute.
Today we have big news for you. It's news about another brand new exclusive development of Lear Incorporated, which you will find on Lear radios. We've told you about Lear wire recording, the wire that remembers. Now Lear has gone further and is ready to announce this new Lear achievement, a way of recording far more faithful and far easier to use even than wire recording. It's a wonderfully accurate and clear recording of sound on tape. With the flick of a switch, you take down your favorite radio programs, the voices of your children, the tunes and words you want to keep and hear again and again. Then immediately you can play it back, for with this new way, there's nothing that has to be rewound. Lear is first to perfect this latest advance in recording, and it will be one of the exclusive features of Lear home radios. This newest feature of Lear radios has been under development in the laboratories for months. Now the story can be told, and soon you'll be able to get it to use in your own living room. All this is just an example of how you always get the latest and most advanced features in Lear products. It's a reminder that if you want to learn of the latest, listen to Lear. For Lear has been first with the newest and best developments in every field of manufacture that Lear has entered. Remember, watch for the radio with the name Lear, L-E-A-R. Now back to Orson Welles.
About last week, we'll begin with last night. I spent it in a nightclub. Now, I know what you're thinking, and you're wrong. My debauchery consisted of about half a gallon of coffee and several hours jam session of magic. My magician companion is one of the most entertaining of entertainers, even for that unspeakable minority that doesn't like magic. His name is Russell Swan. You see, wherever I go, I look up the local or visiting wizard, and a hanky-panky man having told me in Cuba that Russell was playing Miami's new Swank Copacabana, I made haste from the airport to the ringside just in time for the second show, after which the two of us swapped moves and sleights and gags and gimmicks far into the Roomba-filled morning. See, magicians are an international fraternity, and I had a message and a couple of moves for Russ from our mutual friend in Mexico, Fu Manchu. Yes, Fu Manchu, you heard me right, but you're not to assume that Sax Roma's sinister celestial is currently weaving his evil webs and dropping scorpions down chimneys and otherwise harassing our good neighbors south of the border. They've had enough to put up with as it is. No, Fu Manchu is the trade name of Latin America's foremost magic man who runs the best box show, which means a full evening spectacle, since Thurston or even Keller. Fu isn't the Chinese. He pretends to be, but he works in a scrumptious Mandarin wardrobe and speaks Spanish with a Chinese accent. His father started out as an ersatz Japanese and kept the name Okito, which you'll remember, I think, from vaudeville, and his father before him, and so back for 8 generations or more, were all official court magicians to the kings of Holland. Fu Manchu himself, Dave Bamberg, to his friends and on his passport, speaks on stage only Castilian with a Cantonese burr, but is to be heard when a trick isn't going just right, issuing sotto voce commands to his large corps of assistants in the hardy twang of his native Brooklyn. A queer enough cocktail, I think, to give you some notion of why I'm to be found so often and for so long around magic and the sundry fabulous gentlemen who serve the art. Well, here's the story I told Russ Swan last night. In Mexico last week, Fu and I went calling on the latest rage among spiritualist mediums. A lady who, for adequate palm crossing with silver, will cure you of anything that ails you. She doesn't just lay on hands either. Oh, no, this character performs actual surgery, blood and everything, having exchanged the trumpet and the phosphorus tambourine for scalpel and suture. She's a dear old thing. Looks like somebody's mother, which she is. A doctor's mother, our investigations proved. A very shady doctor, to be sure, but then she's a very shady mother. She does a roaring trade, the madam. Her parlor swarms not only with the poorest Mexicans, their savings in hand, but also with the more enlightened sort. A secretary in the British Embassy, for instance, who I talked to, swears to an appendectomy performed with no palpable utensils or anesthetic by some invisible specialist among the spooks. Unluckily, Fu and I were recognized, so we were given nothing more startling for our dough than the ghostly materialization of perfume. An elderly dowager of some social distinction who was there announced that the aroma was like nothing of this earth, but we were pretty sure its basis was the notorious and very cheap patchouli, and chemical analysis later proved we were perfectly right. I relieved the madam of one of her little secret glass vials. She keeps them in her left-hand sweater pocket in case you're interested, while she was busy thoughtfully massaging Mexico's leading magician. Well, Fu is taking his big show to Australia, so he won't be able to come with me, but if I can get back to Mexico again this winter sometime and manage a good enough disguise, I hope to have a first-hand report for you and maybe some photographs for the Mexican police on one of this medium's juicier efforts, an appendix at the very least. That, as Fu Manchu says in his flowery Oriental way, I gotta see. So much for magic. Not that the mighty ruins of Chichen and Uxmal aren't, in the true sense of the word, magical. Centuries ago, the conquering Spaniards looked with our wondering eyes upon the empty and enigmatic monuments of Yucatan, and in all the splendor and wisdom of the Aztecs, there was no hint to be found of this ancient and high civilization, gone 1,000 years by then, lost in the shadows of the Indian jungle where it is too dim and dark to read the words of history. I spent a night last week in the awesome wreckage of what was once an observatory, a place of the Mayans for calculation, for the careful study of the universe. I watched the moon go down and the sun come up over the silent skeleton of a city. Where I watched once, men of science had watched the heavens and inquired of them. And now they are gone. Who can say where or why? And their science gone with them without a trace. Surely these Maya people had some festival like Christmas. But now there are no Christmases in Chichen Itza. I know. I spent Christmas there. Christmas Eve and the date of the day. A lonely Christmas for me, and lonely, I think, too, for all the peoples of a world still divided by nations in the first year of the age of the atom. Well, comes now time for good resolutions, the season for hopes. Of course, our first hope is for peace, true peace. But you don't get peace in return for winning a war in the way that they give you a silver cup for winning a game. You've got to work for peace. And up to now, none of us have worked hard enough to pull it off. Peace is like heaven. No living man has ever seen it, except in his own backyard. Like heaven, it is a matter of faith. And the hope of peace is like the hope of heaven. Most decent people couldn't live without it. About New Year's, if you insist on celebrating it, I think the best way to do it is traditionally with an eggnog, and the easiest way to get an eggnog is to know somebody who makes a good eggnog and go visit him. If you haven't got that kind of friend, you're going to need, according to my recipe, 12 eggs, 2½ cups of sugar, 1 pint of good brandy, 1/4 of Jamaica rum, and 3 quarts of heavy cream. If you've got all those groceries, you don't need any friends. And if you own all that liquor, you won't be able to keep them away. I used to serve eggnogs, as a matter of fact, in the White House. Not anymore, I understand, but the reception is pretty much of a tradition. From the first New Year's of his administration, George Washington held a reception there, and he kept up the custom, and so have most of the other presidents. I'd like to tell you a story now. I've just time for it, about one presidential reception on New Year's Day. The president was shaking hands with the people of the United States. He remembered how tired he was the last New Year's. 3 hours the great levee had taken, and when he'd finished shaking all those hands, he found he was trembling with exhaustion. He remembered later in the day, when he'd taken up his pen, He noticed the trembling, and he remembered fearing it might waver when he signed his name. That men might say of him, looking at that signature, he hesitated. That's why he told the people standing about him, I never in my life felt more right than I do in signing this paper. And now a year had gone by, and it was as if the words were printed in the air between the men and women shaking the president's hand. All persons held as slaves within any state shall be thenceforward and forever free. 12 months of war had marched over his heart since he put his name to that, and now New Year's again. Then suddenly, some new people had come in. Outside, they'd been watching the fine ladies and gentlemen sweeping into the White House. Very slowly and cautiously, they moved nearer to the door, closer, and then closer still. Why shouldn't they go in to see the president and pay their respects? For a long time, they hadn't dared. But now, as if by signal, the Negro people jammed through the door and into the reception rooms. Here's what a newspaper had to say about it in 1864, the New York Independent. For long hours, the president had been shaking hands and had become excessively weary. But here his nerves rallied at the insolent sight, and he welcomed this motley crew with a heartiness that made them wild with exciting joy. The Negroes laughed and wept and laughed, exclaiming through their blinded tears, God bless you. God bless Abraham Lincoln. Those who witnessed this scene will not soon forget it. For a long distance down the avenue on my way home, I heard fast young men crossing the president for this act. But all the way, the refrain rang in my ears. God bless Abraham Lincoln. Now your attention, please, for an interesting announcement.
Perhaps you missed the announcement made earlier on this program. It is big news, so I'm going to repeat it. It's the first announcement of an entirely new kind of recording, more advanced, more faithful, and more convenient to use even than wire recording. It's Lear's sensationally new Sound on Tape. This development of Lear Laboratories provides a simple means to capture for good the radio programs you want and the good times you have around the house. As soon as you've recorded, you can play it all back immediately. Nothing has to be rewound. The recording lasts for a lifetime. Yet if there's anything you don't want to keep, you wipe it off simply by recording something else on the same tape. Many models of Lear home radios will have this new recording. It will be in the fine console combination radio television beauty that tops the line and sells for about $500. It will be in sets costing far less. So again, you have proof that whatever is good and new, whatever will add to your enjoyment of your radio, will be found in Lear radios. And whether you choose the top model or the capable 1995 table model, you can be confident that you're going to have the best that can be had when you buy a radio with the nameplate Lear, L-E-A-R. Now back to Orson Welles, whose views and opinions are his own and do not necessarily represent those of Lear Incorporated.
A great soldier died last week, and I'd like to tell you a story I heard about him just this morning. It happened very recently during General Patton's last visit home. There was a press conference, and somebody asked old Blood and Guts what he thought about another general who had been killed in the war. Patton thought a lot of him, an awful lot of him, and said so. Then he was asked if he'd lend his support to a fundraising drive for a hospital to be named after this general, and Patton said the blankety blank blank he would, or words to that General Patton effect. But why? Patton's reply was, of course, off the record, but I don't think I'm violating any confidence in quoting him now. Infantrymen, said Patton, infantrymen are killed on purpose. That's war. Generals only die by accident. George Patton, who was a very brave man, might have liked that for his epitaph. Well, my time's up now. Please let me come to call again, and thanks for listening this time. Meanwhile, Happy New Year. A real New Year, and a really happy one for you and yours, and mine. Meanwhile, too, speaking for my sponsors and myself, we remain, as always, in 1946, as in 1945, obediently yours.
This program originated in the studios of WGBS Miami. This is ABC, the American Broadcasting Company.
Well, Jello again. This is Buck Benny speaking. We have another one of our Orson Welles commentaries for you. This again is 2024. I have with us, I have Kathy Fuller Seeley. Hey, Kathy. We also have Terry Phillips with us from Imaginary Theater. And chances are you're listening to this sometime fairly soon. I would assume Terry's probably has at least a couple episodes out there of his new mini series that's going to be out on Imaginary Theater by this time, or all four might be out there. But he's doing a four-part show, and we're thinking that at some point we're going to maybe be talking a little bit about the show and how it goes about and all that, and it should be a lot of fun. Anyway, but just to check it out, if they just search Imaginary Theater, they'll find it. It's Imagine-Air-Theater. It's also on YouTube. And right now you have 10 episodes out
10
there?
or 11.
11.
I think this is number 12.
So this will take you from
the
12 to
the numbering is kind of
15.
weird because I had a two-parter before, and I think I called those two separate episodes. But this one will be labeled, I think, online as 12.1, 12.2, 12.3, and 12.4.
Okay.
But I think we'll have like 15 episodes by the time they're all up.
Beautiful.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Fabulous.
That's awesome. And Terry, you've done it now for a few years with a little pause here and there, things. Yeah. Do you still enjoy doing them? I mean, as much as
more than I can tell you. There's very little I've done that gives me more joy than writing and producing these audio plays.
Yeah.
A lot of it has to do with the fact that I get to work with some amazing actors. Yeah. And this episode, I think, is going to be the best so far, not just because of the quality of their performances, right, but the number of them. I've got a dozen characters in this in this four-part series, miniseries. Wow.
That's pretty cool.
Every one of them is just amazing.
Is part of it, because I would think part of it would be you are a piece of creating this thing from nothingness. You write this thing, and then you put together this team to make it come to life. I would just think that would be so rewarding to, at the end of it, to be able to say, oh, I saw this thing all the way through from the beginning to the end. And that would be, I don't know, hugely rewarding, I would think.
Well, it's also the best example I can think of the pleasure of collaboration. Because first of all, this episode, these 4 episodes, this miniseries was co-authored by a retired history professor in Chicago, Roy Schreiber, and he was the one who came up with the concept for this series. But I also have a casting director, and she's one of our performers, but she's the one who's been coming up with this cast of amazing actors. So I take happily take credit for my part in it, but it's far from a one-man show.
That's fabulous. Are you all still doing it remotely? And so to
nobody,
create your performance, you have to literally put it all together.
Nobody is in the same room. Every one of these actors does his or her lines one at a time. Then they send me the files, and I put them together and add music and sound effects and like that.
So that takes a lot of work putting that all together, I would think. Right?
Yeah, but I'm also lucky to be doing it now instead of 30 years ago, because the tools,
the technology,
are just terrific. It's really very I won't say it's easy, but it's certainly easier than it would have been once upon a time.
Sure. And what's it like? I mean, you used to writing these on your own. When you're writing with a collaborator, I mean, is there a lot of like arguing, going like, well, I think we should go this way and I think we should go that way? Or is it like, did it just kind of dovetail together?
There's certainly discussion.
Yeah.
The way we did this particular collaboration, we divided up the scenes. So he wrote some scenes, I wrote others, and then we would send them back and forth and give suggestions to each other. Because
so sort of like Lennon and McCartney, you would be
very much like that.
Yeah, the same thing, just with...
but I don't play left hand.
Okay.
Because
so you're John.
because I'm the host and the producer, I have the final say, but I'm not dictatorial about it. If somebody,
No.
and not just my collaborator, but I also collaborate with the actors who will make suggestions on the script, and I have an in-house critic, my best friend from high school,
Okay.
Mark Boyce, who is the one I send all of the scripts to before we send it out for casting, because he's not a writer, but as he says, he's a critic, and so
Yeah.
he's really good at
Wow.
picking apart the story and finding better ways of expressing things.
Right.
And my sister is involved in this process as well. She fully deserves to be a co-producer, as she is in other work that I've done. So I'm really lucky to have a great team.
Marvelous.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And is there anything happening or any updates or anything on your Reagan Saves the World stuff?
Well, as a matter of fact, we have renamed the play. It was originally called Ronald Reagan Saves the World, and it was, to put it mildly, confusing, because people who are fans of Ronald Reagan are concerned that it might be mocking him. And
Yes.
people who didn't like Ronald Reagan thought that it was lionizing him. And in fact,
Yeah.
it's neither of those things. It's a biographical one-man show. So it has been renamed. It is now called Ronald Reagan, the Last Republican.
Okay.
And that's the reaction I usually get. Oh, okay.
Oh, I think
No, I like it.
great,
I
but
like
it's-
it.
it's-
That's what I
like
mean.
it,
That's
it's provocative.
it's provocative, but it's also clear.
Yes.
There's no question about the approach.
No, yes, I like that.
And as I
Mhm.
say, when pressed, he really was the end of an era, as
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Republicans go.
I would agree with all of that. So, interesting. All right.
And it's scheduled to be performed in my hometown in Bakersfield in July. We're doing a 2-week run here, and then after that, I don't know yet. And we might squeeze in one before that as well.
And are you still looking to get it streamed somewhere or something at some point?
Yes, and as if I didn't have enough else to do, I'm writing a screen adaptation,
Okay.
a movie based on the play, not a film of the play,
Mhm,
Right.
but
mhm.
Oh, wow.
Well, it's a good opportunity to get him on horses. So
that's
right.
Well, and it probably won't be a one person show at that point. There'll be a bigger cast.
Yeah. 2 people. But
Lord.
double the cast. It's like, oh,
That's
crap.
and Nancy. So.
All right. Well, let's get on to Orson. So,
Okay.
so
I'm sorry, that's all the time I
that's
have.
all. All right. Enjoy Orson. Here we go. Bye now. But this episode is often Orson covers a lot of ground and things, and so let's just chat a little about what's going on. Well, I'll just say at the very beginning, he says he was talking to a friend of his. Who was he talking to again, Terry?
Oh, well, Haywood Broun, the sports
Haywood
writer,
Broun, and then
and
he
Joseph
mentioned
Cotton.
Joseph Cotton, who of course is an actor that's in a lot of the works that a lot of his movies and things, and I think he's in Alfred Hitchcock films too and things. He's
Mhm.
he's
Mhm.
quite a prolific actor. Anyway, so he talks about them having discussions and saying he uses the term "save the world." I just thought it's interesting. I didn't realize that this would be from that far back, 75 years ago, that term, because we always use that when, you're together with your friends, maybe you're drinking together or whatever, and you're talking about world problems, and you're like, if we just got more money from the rich, things would be much better. Or somebody's saying, oh, they just left everybody's guns alone, it'd be fine. Why do they always come after my guns? And everybody's saying lots of different things and thinking that they have the solutions for the planet, and we kind of tell our friends, what were you doing? Oh, we were solving world problems and so forth.
Yeah.
And it's just neat to see that piece of what we do and that terminology has been around for so long. You would think with everybody using that terminology for so long, somebody actually would have solved the problems of the world by now. But apparently not. Apparently we can only solve them in our little groups, and it never gets to be a big thing. Anyway, so let's go over to Kathy. What did you think of this one, or what stood
Well,
out to
this
you?
is for a 15-minute broadcast. this one is a giant mixing bowl of so many of Orson's favorite topics, from a slight tour of the historic beaches of Miami, as he says, to talking about his interest slash obsession with the history of magicians, enjoying magicians, but then needing to trash or expose charlatans. You know, what I want to say, hoodwinking the
Yes.
poor and vulnerable. So that's from his trip to Mexico, as well as being out spending the night, Christmas night, on sleeping on the ruins of Chichen Itza. What is going on? To then telling the delightful story about President Abraham Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation and New Year's receptions, to noting the passing of General George Patton. Everything crammed into one, also with an amazing ad from Lear Radios about that they're going to bring tape recording to the masses. So
Exactly.
we might talk about that later, but so much packed into this one little episode. So
Yeah, excellent. Which I always like that he does. Personally, as he talks about the various fortune teller things, those parts never hold up as well for me today. I don't know. I'm just like, I want to just say next subject, Orson, next subject, because he has so many subjects he can cover, and I'm like, that's one he's interested in. But to me, it doesn't apply that much to me, and maybe it's, I don't know. I was going to say maybe we have less of that now, but I don't know. I think we have 1-800 fortune teller or anything that you could call, and I'm sure there's lots of money, more money in it now than there's ever been.
Yes.
But
1-800 call a psychic. So.
Yeah, exactly. And those psychics are giving people advice all over the place of what they should do with their lives and things, and people are giving lots of money. So I mean, it's still, that's probably one of the things he'd be talking about today if he were around. But anyway, Terry, what were your thoughts on some of this?
Let's see. This commentary was broadcast on December the 30th of 1945. George Patton died on the 21st, so 9 days before this.
Okay.
And Orson Welles had talked a lot about Patton throughout these commentaries, Old Blood and Guts, as he was called. And I thought it was a fitting tribute, because even though he was criticized and certainly very controversial in his time, he was also a noteworthy military figure and cultural figure. So I was glad that he didn't ignore him and that he didn't trash him. I mean, not that he didn't deserve criticism, but there it was. The one name that I wanted to bring up was Fu Manchu. No, not that Fu Manchu.
Yes.
David Bamberg, the magician who comes from the famous Bamberg family of commissions, of magicians. I think Wells said there were like 8 generations of them.
Yeah, it was like a huge amount. Yeah.
And I read a little bit about this family and about this particular magician, and it's amazing to me that they aren't more famous. I would have thought that by now somebody would have. I don't know if there have been movies made about them, but Fu Manchu was not his only persona. It was the one that Wells focuses on in this commentary. But he spent a lot of time traveling, including in Wells' old stomping ground in Latin America. I think in Argentina. I believe he spent that Bamberg spent a lot of time in Buenos Aires. Okay. But the whole notion of debunking fraudsters and fakes was not only popular for Wells, but of course Harry Houdini did the same thing. People who claimed to be able to communicate with the dead or read minds and so forth. And I was an amateur magician when I was a kid, and I still like doing sleight of hand, but I appreciated Wells' art. I've seen footage of him performing magic tricks, and he really was very good at it. But it wasn't just sleight of hand. It was again Wells being this amazing theatrical personality. It was the show. It was the performance. I think that is true of everything that Wells does. His commentaries are theatrical, obviously his movies and stage shows were, but even his personal life was really very theatrical. And it's a great joy that we have so much recorded of him that we can
Yes.
continue enjoying him all these years later.
Well, it just makes me think that like there's lots of folks that do commentaries where we can find 15-minute commentaries that a lot of folks have done. Now, granted, most of them probably are questionable of how many you can find of anybody, right? Chances are you find 5 of this person's and 2 of this person's and whatever. Because they commentaries and things like that, folks didn't go around saving them very well and that sort of thing. It doesn't seem like. Even I was trying to listen to some of what was the one? Oh gosh, the famous one he did like 4-minute ones, and it'd
Paul
be
Harvey.
Good Day.
Paul
Yeah,
Harvey.
Paul Harvey, and
And
even
that,
Paul Harvey's, you'll find them, but they'll be like maybe you'll find a month's worth in a row, and then it'll skip 8 months, and then there'll be another episode or two, and then all of a sudden you'll find a run of 6 months of shows for him, but they're missing huge batches of them, and they're fun to listen to. But I can't think of anybody else that does commentaries that we would be doing, even if they were available, that we would do, or we chat about each one, and like we do with Orson. Orson, part of it honestly is probably that he didn't do them that long. I mean, we have like 60 of them or whatever. So it's very finite amount that we can do. And the fact that they were recently found makes it more interesting for us to do them. So there's lots of reasons we do these. But if it wasn't interesting, we certainly wouldn't be doing these. And he's from week to week, he's almost always interesting in some way. The whole show may not be, but he'll have an interesting piece or a piece we can talk about. And certainly on most shows, you're going, okay, I've got 20 things that he mentions we can talk about, but in reality, we can cover probably 5. So we each kind of pick 1 or 2 that we talk about, and that's it. And we're leaving a bunch on the floor that listeners are listening to and going, oh, they didn't talk about that one. But you can't cover it all. The ground he covers is amazing. And sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he'll spend like the whole time reading from the Bible or something, and then he doesn't cover as much. But even those ones, I'm amazed because sometimes he'll read from the Bible of his 15-minute thing. Maybe he'll do 2/3 of it will be on the Bible, but then the last third, all of a sudden, he covers a whole bunch of ground, like he's trying to make up for the fact that he's stuck on one subject for so long. He's like, oh, I still want to fit in 20 subjects, so I'm going to talk about all this stuff really fast. So he'll say a sentence or two, and that sentence or two is something that it's interesting to talk about. Interesting. So I just love the fact that we do these. The Lincoln one I just wanted to mention because it's a story we think we've heard before, though we could have heard it last time through that we went through this, because of course this is the second time we're doing these, because we didn't have all of us on this one. I think it was just Kathy and I that did this one originally. But just the way he describes, and who knows if it's true or not true or whatever, but the way that Lincoln paused for a second, talked a little bit before he signed the Emancipation Declaration to make sure his hand wasn't shaking, and he wanted to be a firm signing that he does. He didn't want people to come back and say, oh, he really didn't believe that, wholeheartedly in signing that and things. And so that's a neat piece. And then having African Americans come up to him and shaking their hands and things, that's just kind of a cool image to have. And again, I don't know how much of this is real and how much of it is Orson playing things up, but just a delightful little piece that he does there. And then were there any other pieces we wanted to touch on before we head out? Or
well, I just wanted to suggest to listeners, pay attention to the lovely way he combines and elides things from talking about what is it? What a divided nation we are now, and the whole world is lonely in the age of the atom, because he talks about feeling very lonely, sleeping Christmas night on top of
I love that.
and to move that to the idea of peace as peace is like heaven, a matter of faith. And he
Yeah.
moves from that to the practicality of, oh, it's New Year's, so you should have eggnog. So here's my eggnog recipe.
Oh,
And
yeah,
then
you can use
moves
eggnog
from
recipe.
that
Yeah,
to
I forgot about
George
that. Yeah.
Washington and the White House tradition of having eggnog on New Year's, and moves to from that to the Abraham Lincoln story.
Oh my gosh, he
He's a
segues so
terrific
beautifully.
writer.
Yeah.
So
And I
I guess
love,
we could also note that the weather played a part in this commentary. He was planning to be either in Havana or New York, but ended up in Miami. I guess that's possible. The funny thing is that if he was doing these live, they probably had to scramble to find a location for him, since he was going to be, I don't know how they would have done it from
Yeah.
Cuba, but anyway, there were probably plenty of potential radio stations in and around Miami where he could do these.
well, it's kind of funny how this batch of ones that we've covered have been kind of a road trip with him of all these places he's been. He's been in Mexico and Chicago and here, and yeah, so just a little bit of
I will say, because I've certainly focused more on this in doing these radio plays, that I paid attention to the ambient sound, and you could hear traffic in this
Yeah.
one.
yeah.
wow, really good. Yeah.
Because he actually says something that I think that he's doing this one from a radio station.
Yeah.
And so I go, wouldn't they know better than
Maybe
Yeah.
they opened the window for him. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows?
He's probably
Well,
smoking a cigar.
And the fact that he talks about, and he talks about it lots of different times, and we'll even focus whole episodes on it, but about the time of the atom, now that they have nuclear bombs and everything, the just yeah, the atomic bomb, and the fact that it's so recent and that it permeates throughout all of these commentaries
Yeah.
is one of the reasons I love this so much, because I would think at the time you'd be, how are we going to use, what are we safer than we were without the thing? Are we not as safe? At this point in time, we're the only country that has it, but
Yeah.
it's like there's a lot of other countries aiming to get it. Yeah, at one of his commentaries, he mentions how many countries he thinks will get it and how quickly they'll get it. And certainly he was way off on that. It came out way slower that those countries got it. But in current days, he was pretty close to his guess. I think his guess was 9 countries would get it. And he thought 9 countries would get it by like 1950 or something. And it certainly wasn't that. But still, amazing to hear somebody talk and mention that that's on their mind, and that's because I would just think after the war that would be on a lot of people's minds. Now, a lot of people wouldn't be. A lot of people are just looking for a job and trying to find a place to come back and get a house and things. And I don't think it's this episode. I think it's the next one. He talks about the lumber shortage and that it's hard for folks to find housing and things. And that's another thing I really like about the commentaries, is that he keeps us kind of appraised of how the man coming back from the war is getting along, and what the problems that he runs into, and the problems from our government not supporting the returning veterans as much as maybe he thinks they should, and so forth.
I wish Vincent were here, because I'd like to ask him this question too, but did Wells ever indicate that he had any interest in holding public office?
Not that I know of.
I believe he hinted at it because he worked so closely with Roosevelt, and he went down and advised Roosevelt, during the
Wrote
war.
speeches for him.
And then he's working with us at Wendell Willkie and
Yeah.
the first world, whatever world, one world movement, and
Well, he's definitely supporting folks, and he definitely throws his support behind folks, and he definitely criticizes other folks, right?
Yeah.
So he seems very comfortable in that role.
yeah,
As far as being one himself, I think if he was realistic at all, he'd realize, boy, he would have a real uphill battle, in that he's well known, but also his views are very left, and were they too left for the time to be elected? I don't know. But
Right. I think he really saw himself as this kind of a freelance advisor.
yeah,
But just what a young man he was. And here, from hobnobbing with famous actors and writers to presidents,
yeah,
what an extraordinary time in an individual. That's
agreed. Agreed. So anyway, we'll let folks enjoy this one unless there's anything else, and then we'll come back and do another one. All right. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much, everybody.